All right, attention everyone, good evening. The hearing's about to start. Thank you. So my name is Jonathan Gomwalk, and I'm the hearing officer for San Francisco Public Works. Clint Otwell is the clerk for this hearing. This hearing is being recorded, and a sign-in sheet is on the table on the side of the room. Please be sure to sign in for our records, and so that if necessary, we can contact you in the future regarding the item you're here for. The public hearing is being held to consider 5 items, appeals from property owners that were assessed fines for either excessive or illegal pruning of trees, for not planting a replacement tree, or for illegally removing a tree. They are order number 201382 to consider the removal of one street tree without replacement adjacent to 27 Germania Street. Order number 201383 to consider the removal of one street tree without replacement adjacent to 166 Germania Street. Order number 201384 to consider the removal of 4 street trees without replacement within the 6100 Gary Boulevard median. Order number 201392 to consider the removal of 1 street tree with replacement adjacent to 3015 Van Ness Avenue. And order number 20405 to consider the removal of 11 street trees, 10 ficus, and 1 Caleri tree with replacement along 16th Street between Potrero Avenue and 7th Street, adjacent to the locations listed below. The trees are in poor condition. This is related to Phase 1 of the 16th Street Improvement Project from 7th Street to Potrero Avenue. My job as the hearing officer is to gather the facts for the hearing item, listen to your testimonies, and help our Director of Public Works to make determinations. I will not be making any decisions today. Instead, I'll forward the findings from this hearing and make my recommendations to the Director. The Director will make all the final determinations. When the Director's determinations are made, the department will notify you of what they are. Therefore, if you do want to be notified, please sign in. The hearing will proceed as follows for each case. Public Works staff will speak first and present the case, and then the property owner or appellant will be allowed to speak. Then any member of the public or witness who wants to speak will be able to speak. Then the Public Works Department, if the department would like to address any comments, may also do so. And then the property owner or the appellant again might also speak if that person has any rebuttals. Each speaker will have up to 3 minutes to speak. The clerk will monitor the time for all speakers. When you hear the first bell, it means the speaker has 30 seconds left to speak. A louder second bell signals that the time is up. Comments and questions should be addressed to me and not to the department or the applicant. If you cannot finish your comments within the allotted time, you may submit written testimony by the end of this hearing to me. If I feel a question is warranted, I will ask the question. After all comments are completed, the item will be closed. We will now begin the hearing, and I'd like to begin the hearing with order number 201382 to consider the removal of 1 street tree without replacement adjacent to 27 Germania Street, Public Works.
Good evening, Chris Buck with San Francisco Public Works, Bureau of Urban Forestry. Excuse me. So most of the cases, some of the cases tonight have to relate to Street Tree SF, our implementation of Proposition E, which passed a couple of years ago. Most cases may not be about that, but we have some general information up front here, just talking about the Public Works Strategic Plan, and that the goal is to ensure safe, clean, and green infrastructure in public rights of way. We have a lot more information about Street Tree SF and the fact that the city now maintains all of the street trees in San Francisco. We're still asking for everyone's patience as we address the worst first tree conditions across the city, but eventually we'll settle into a 3 to 5 year maintenance cycle. We have more information about Street Tree SF on our website at sfpublicworks.org and /trees, including a pruning schedule. But again, I don't think this evening we have that many cases related to street tree SF. So the first item this evening, order number 201382, is at 27 Germania Street. And just general background about why Public Works was out performing work on this block. We received a number of complaints about damaged sidewalk, and we went out to look at expanding tree basins so that we could repair the sidewalk and keep the trees. That's typically, you know, the first best management practice is keep the tree. You can swap the sidewalk in and out because brand new sidewalk has the same value of sidewalk that's in good condition from 10 years ago, whereas street trees increase in value as they get larger because they provide a lot more benefits and just make places much better to live. On Germania, we have really narrow sidewalks, and the reason I mention that first off is that when we're evaluating trees and sites, the other thing we're doing is we're evaluating if the site itself is replantable. We have a lot of alleys throughout the city where sidewalks are not wide enough to accommodate both a 4-foot required path to travel. So 4-foot path of travel is required by San Francisco ADA guidelines. The national federal minimum is 36 inches, but this being San Francisco, we want to outdo everyone, so we're going to outdo the federal by 1 foot. So we need a 4-foot path to travel. And in terms of potential replacement trees in Germania, for these particular trees, the sidewalk is approximately 6 feet wide. Our current minimum basin size is a 3x3, so really we want a 7-foot path of travel. On a case-by-case basis, we will replant in a 2.5 by 3 foot basin, but the current director's order stipulates that the basin size really be a minimum of 3x3. The idea being that trees really do need more space in which to grow, otherwise they get damaged by autos or get vandalized and have not a lot of space to grow between the sidewalk and the facade. So this is the subject tree. It's a ficus tree with extremely poor structure. It's a relatively small ficus tree. I don't have my typical tree removal criteria for ficus trees included within this presentation, but we have a lot of information about our website, on our website, about structural failures within the species. This tree was topped many years ago and has very poor structure. Here's a look at the sidewalk and the recently repaired sidewalk. This tree has 2 main stems with a narrow point of attachment, which is prone to fail. One other thing is that the tree really lacks, in this image on the left, the tree completely lacks our required clearance of 14 feet directly over the road. Now, this tree was privately maintained until 2 years ago. On trees that the city maintains, like on Mission Street or Van Ness or Market, we're always pruning trees and structurally pruning them so that we can elevate the required 14 feet of clearance directly over the road so that trucks can pull alongside the curb without damaging the tree. What happens often is these trees are privately maintained. We do send letters to property owners back in the day, just 2 years ago, when all 2/3 of street trees were maintained by by the fronting property owner. We mailed countless letters to homeowners saying, hey, your tree really lacks clearance over the road. It's going to get damaged if you're not careful. Please, maybe not overnight, but over a period of years, systematically start pruning the tree back so we get the required 14 feet of clearance over the road. Now, at this point, you'd be removing half the tree if you try to get that required clearance. So when we went out to evaluate the sidewalk conditions, we posted 2 trees for removal on Germania, or at least these 2 that were protested. And we said, you know, the tree is in very poor condition. It's in a very challenging site. Unfortunately, it can't be replanted, and the structure is prone to fail, even though it's a very small tree. So those were the reasons behind why we initiated the removal of the tree, why we stated on the removal notice that it's not replantable, and a little bit about our policy towards replanting in narrow sidewalks. So unfortunately, our code does require replacement, but it also says the planting site has to be viable and meet our minimum guidelines for replacement. And unfortunately, tree advocates like to think that we're pretty powerful, but the ADA folks really make us look like we're coming second to the table. We need sidewalks to be accessible and allow people to pass on the sidewalk. And unfortunately, this is a common situation throughout the city. But we only remove the trees when we really feel like they're in extremely poor condition. So to be consistent with how we've handled similar cases, we're making the repairs nearby, and we posted the removal notice on this tree and received a protest during the 30-day public notification period. So that's where we are at this point with this particular tree. Again, removal without replacement due to the narrowness of the sidewalk. Thank you. And this center mic can be used. I'm using this mic because it's closest to the PowerPoint.
Okay.
But the public can feel free to use this center mic. Thank you.
Thank you. Is the property owner or appellant here? They may step up to the mic to speak. 27 Germania, property owner, appellant. Step up to the mic. Okay. No property owner. Does the department have anything further to add? Yeah, well, we're getting to you. I'll have, if the department wants to add, then I'm going to ask for anyone from the public.
No additional comment.
Okay, all right. Anyone from the public? Yes, sir. State your name for the record, please.
My name is John Nolte, and I have a question or a comment for DPW. Since they're saying that the in front of 27 Germania, the sidewalk is not wide enough, they've asked this question before. Well, one side might not be wide enough, but how about the other side of the street, the even side of the street of Germania, is that wide enough for trees? Because if you're taking out one tree and you can replace it at the current site, but you can put it across the street. So I'm posing that question of whether or not it can be planted across the street or in the immediate area, so that they can have a replacement tree to replace that tree. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else from the public wish to speak? Thank you, sir. Please state your name for the record.
My name is Scott Madden. I live at 32 Lloyd Street in the vicinity of the subject site. And I am one of the members of the public who objected not so much to the removal of the tree, but to the non-replacement of it. I walk my dog in this neighborhood quite frequently, especially down Germania Street. And it is one of the charming alley streets in the Lower Haight, and it is lined with trees on both sides. My question really has to do with the fact that on the same street, it's just a 2-block long street, there are other trees planted on the sidewalk that were recently planted and are smaller than the subject tree that would be removed, but they seem to be existing quite nicely in the space of the 6-foot sidewalk. And I guess what I don't understand is this is an existing tree bed, and rather than just not replace the tree, can we grandfather that space in because it's already existing, rather than remove the tree and not replace it anywhere in the city, which would end up being a net deficit to the urban canopy. And the Board of Supervisors approved the urban forestry plan a few years ago, and it's a pretty aggressive goal of planting new street trees. And the more street trees that we remove without replacement, the harder it is to actually meet the goals of our urban forestry plan. And I do have some pictures of other trees on Germania Street that I'd like to share. This one is at number 11. It's a little bit of a glare. It's a ginkgo tree, and it's fairly young, so my assumption is that it was fairly recently planted, and there seems to be sufficient clearance on the sidewalk here. And this one is at number 20. Another small tree recently planted, and if it weren't for these terracotta pots, there would definitely be significant clearance on the sidewalk. This is number 46 Germania. Same thing. This is almost directly across from the subject site. And then further down the block, there's number 99 Germania. This tree was planted by Friends of the Urban Forest not long ago. There's a bit of a glare on here. I'm not sure how to correct for that. But again, you can see there's plenty of clearance for pedestrians and even wheelchairs to pass by these planted street trees. 119 Germania is another good example. And these trees are, relatively young and small, but this next photograph actually shows that when the trees mature and they get larger, there's still plenty of room. And I think this is a good example of the extent to which these trees actually enhance the quality of life on the block. And so just to sum up, in the interest of maintaining a livable city, if there's an existing tree bed and there's a problem with a tree that is currently growing in it, I have no objection to removing it for public safety, but let's just grandfather that tree bed space in and use it for another tree that is more appropriate for the space, that may not be as big as a ficus tree, that would cause less damage to the sidewalk, but that would still enhance the quality of life. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Sir. Anyone else from the public? Yes, sir. Please state your name for the record.
Hey, my name is Josh Klipp. You know me as a tree guy, but I'm here to speak on this one as in my capacity as a certified access specialist. What that means is I am certified through the Division of the State Architect to speak on issues regarding accessibility in the built environment, including things like clear sidewalk widths. And I will say also, it's not an easy title to get. I'm number 812 in the entire state of California. So it means something.
Yes, sir.
And what I want to point out is what Chris is referring to isn't a city policy, the 48 inches. That's actually in the California Building Code. It's California Building Code 11B 403.5.1, which requires the 48 inches width. But that section also allows for reductions in those widths based on certain circumstances. And what we know in San Francisco is that we've got a lot of these alleys like this. We've got a lot of these alleys with small sidewalks, with narrow sidewalks like this, where when we lose these trees, we're going to be losing them permanently if we don't do something about it. And so what I would respectfully request is that this issue be submitted to the city attorney for some type of opinion letter, because otherwise every single alley that loses a tree is never going to get it back. And I would point out, too, that the 3x3 basin size is really a best practices in an ideal situation, but it's policy, it's not law. So if there is a way that both of these things can be met, that's something that I would respectfully request the city attorney to look into, whether we can essentially harmonize the California Building Code and its exceptions with best practices for replanting, so that we don't just lose every single tree on an alley as it dies. Also, your timer's not on. Thanks.
Thank you. You got a nice clerk. It's mine. Yeah, it's fine. I have my clock here. Anyone else from the public would like to speak on this item?
Yeah, hi, my name is Sarah Coe, and I actually came to the hearing to speak on the last item, but just hearing people speak here, both these trees are ficus trees, and it seems, I went to the hearing a couple weeks ago, and they want to remove a lot of ficus trees on 24th Street. It does seem like there's a concerted effort to remove ficus trees for what's been described as safety reasons, but, so I just wanted to point out, I mean, it doesn't seem, I mean, these trees are old trees, and they probably will not be planted by the city again, which I understand, but they are existing trees, and they provide a canopy, they provide a home for birds, they provide a lot of things that our city is currently trying to create more of. So I don't know, I just wanted to make that comment. It does seem like these ficus trees have been around for a long time, and just like older people, they aren't perfect, but they are providing things to this city that we need right now.
Thank you. Anyone else from the public like to speak regarding this item? Okay, seeing no one else from the public, this item is now closed. We will now move on to item number 201383, to consider the removal of one street tree without replacement adjacent to 166 Germania Street.
Good evening, Chris Buck with San Francisco Public Works, Bureau of Urban Forestry. There's a couple things I'll add about this narrow sidewalks in a moment. Appreciate the feedback from the public. So similar situation in terms of Public Works was called out onto this block of Germania. We received complaints from the public, and I'm sure they weren't looking to have trees removed. They were just like, hey, the sidewalk on our blocks is really bad. Can the city come out and get it repaired? And because of Street Tree SF, we actually have funds now both for maintenance of street trees and also making sidewalk repair. And again, if we believe the tree itself is healthy and sustainable, the preference is always absolutely to leave it in place. And so this is a view of the next subject tree. This is also a ficus tree. And also consider without replacement due to the narrowness of the sidewalk. So one thing about ficus trees is we stopped planting them by the mid-90s, and the real issue with ficus trees up until a few years ago was the amount of sidewalk damage that the root system creates to sidewalk. About 5 years ago, we started having really large stem failures across the city, which added to our concerns. But it's, and again, if the tree is relatively healthy, we don't care if it's on our do not plant list, we're still gonna keep it as long as it has good structure. But we haven't been planting ficus trees in San Francisco since the mid-90s due to the amount of sidewalk damage they cause. So I just want to point out here that in terms of removal, a ficus tree on an alley is really an unsustainable situation. But if the ficus does not cause a lot of sidewalk damage and it has relatively low clearance, the structure is even fair, we're certainly inclined to keep it. That said, a ficus tree probably requires about as much room as we have on Dolores Street, really wide sidewalk, not such a narrow alley. But I understand the feedback tonight is mostly about replacement. But this is a view of the before. This is, relatively speaking, still a very small ficus. It may be relatively old, but with limited growing space, it's going to grow much more slowly. But you can see there's not a lot of space between the base of the trunk and the facade of the building. We do allow pinch points, so there's feedback earlier, and I made a note that it's California Code 2, which is great. We've been removing trees without requiring replacement for many years in alleys, so it's an issue that Public Works has been well aware of, and we've certainly been going through this. But to get back to feedback from the previous hearing item number, for sure, I think in our resulting recommendation, I'll be speaking to our superintendent so we can speak to that issue specifically. And I heard the feedback, so I just want to circle back on that as well. The challenge with trees and narrow sidewalks is that they don't always perform well, and I do want to encourage folks to really look at the street trees in narrow alleys and really look at the structure, how they're formed and what's holding them up. There are some success stories, but it's really difficult, to look at this alley and say that's a reasonable place to grow a tree. The challenge, of course, is that we have hundreds of city blocks like this. Without a doubt, we'll go back to this block and look for any, sometimes these alleys have little idiosyncrasies with the width of the sidewalk. If we can get any replacement trees meeting the current standard, we'll pursue that. So that's another item that we'll follow up on, absolutely. Not just in front of this facade, but anywhere on the 2-block stretch of Germania. But again, we were out here repairing sidewalk. We have a ficus with, I don't have photos of it, but very poor structure. And so our decision was a pretty easy one for the city to make in recommending removal of this tree, and unfortunately without replacement. But again, we'll address those concerns in any resulting decision. But what we're saying here is that street trees need space to really grow and thrive. There are implications here that are seemingly overwhelming. I think we'll need to address that in our resulting decision, but we've had many, many hearings over the years where trees have not been replanted due to a number of conflicts on a site, and a narrow sidewalk is definitely one of them. It's very difficult to get proper clearance directly over the road and sidewalk, even when the tree is young. But I appreciate the photos that were provided by the, at the previous item, made note of those. If that member of the public wishes to leave them behind with us, we'll absolutely take those and check out all those sites. But to be consistent with how we've handled similar cases, we did initiate the removal of this one ficus tree without replacement due to the narrowness of the sidewalk. Thank you.
Thank you. Is the property owner for 166 Germania can step up to the mic and plead their case, appellant? Okay, no property owner. Anyone from the public would like to speak regarding this item? Please do so.
Just for the record, my name is Scott Madden, and I submit the same points and arguments that I made about the removal and non-replacement of the tree at 27 Germania, I think it is.
Yeah.
It's the same argument for the removal of this tree at 166.
Right.
I have no objection to the actual removal of the ficus tree. The department's argument for removal makes perfect sense to me. In so many ways, ficus trees are not appropriate for alley streets like this one. But it's hard for me to imagine that there isn't a single type of tree that would be appropriate for the type of, the amount of space that currently exists for a tree on that street. Thank you.
Thank you.
For the record, my name is John Nolte, and I'm here to broaden my objection to the removal of these two trees, or this one tree right now, on Germania because of the narrow sidewalk. We have plans for multiple neighborhoods dealing with alleys. And to come up and tell me that those plans done by architects for Octavia plan, for Polk Street improvement on the alleyways to put in trees is bogus and been passed by the city on multiple levels to be planted all these alleyways is not going to fly with me. Okay, and so those are already been passed. They already been are part of the plans of these different neighborhoods. These alleyways are to have trees, irrespective to the narrowness of the sidewalks. They still get the trees. So that's a conflict I see right now. If these plans have already been passed and they're part of the record, the Octavia plan was passed in 2007, and then the Polk Street one was passed a couple of years ago. So, so again, to deal with the alleyways on both of those main boulevards or streets, they have plans to plant and open up the alleyways on those two main streets in San Francisco. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else from the public? Yes, sir.
Josh Klipp. Just to reiterate, I am not asking this, the issue of the clear sidewalk width be elevated to the director. Because this involves an interpretation of law, I would respectfully request that it go to the city attorney. And I would also request that the city attorney, in interpreting and looking at whether there can be exceptions to that law, actually engage the community of persons with disabilities, because as somebody who works regularly with people with disabilities, what I can say is they really hate getting thrown under the bus on this issue. They hate being told, because this comes up in cities all over the place, that we can't plant trees on these sidewalks because they're not wide enough for you. And I can't tell you how many people who use wheelchairs have said to me, we really resent that because that makes them look like they're anti-environment, and these things can exist together. So I would respectfully request that this issue not just go to the director of DPW, he's not an attorney as far as I know, but that it go to the city attorney because it does involve an interpretation of law, and that the community of persons with disabilities be engaged in providing an interpretation of that. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Anyone else from the public wish to comment on this item? Anyone else? Okay. Department, do you have anything further you wish to add?
Thank you, Chris Buck with San Francisco Public Works Bureau of Urban Forestry. Nothing to add, but I've heard the public feedback in both of these previous items we just heard, currently hearing, including Mr. Klipp's feedback, and for sure, that's something that we will follow up on. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no more public comment, this item is now closed. And we will now proceed on to item number 3, order number 201384, which is to consider the removal of 4 street trees without replacement within the 6100 Geary Boulevard median. Public Works staff, do you have a presentation regarding this item, 6100 Geary Boulevard?
Good evening, Chris Buck with San Francisco Public Works Bureau of Urban Forestry. A little different, switching gears on this next case at 6100 Geary Boulevard. It's the median in the middle of the roadway. And our inspector handling this item was approached, and I've just got some additional information in preparation for tonight's hearing that I can present, because I think it's going to probably change the process a little bit. But we were approached by our inspector thought the request was to simply replace the streetlight pole. What we've learned since, so basically, let me run through the trees and explain what our initial thought was. Our inspector, who's relatively newer to our department, didn't realize that the streetlight pole that's being discussed also has a wireless facility attached to the top. So what we're looking at here is not just removal of a street light pole with replacement of a street light pole. It's actually a wireless facility. So what we're going to do is probably backtrack a little bit and have them submit a tree removal permit application because it's related to a wireless application, not just a utility trying to replace an existing street light. But we'll still go through the photos and just show you the 4 trees. So they're Callistemon citrinus, bottlebrush trees. They've been reclassified. Now scientists, grad students refer to them as Melaleuca. So they've been moved into a different genus, Melaleuca citrinus. But you can still call them bottlebrush trees, and that will cover most folks. But so these are the trees in question surrounding that immediate light pole area. Again, our inspector believed that this was just a simple streetlight replacement, but literally as of this afternoon, we just found out that I believe the application, our contact for this is Modus. And when I was preparing for the hearing this evening, I said, well, Modus is not a utility, that's a wireless provider. So we're likely going to circle back after this evening, require them to submit a tree removal permit related to wireless. I'll double check. We still have posted the trees, but I do believe we need to disclose, that it's not a matter of replacing just a street light, but it would be a street light with a wireless facility attached to it. So we'll probably just start this process all over. But these are the trees in question, 4 relatively small bottlebrush trees in the median at 6100 Geary Boulevard. I understand that the protest that we received during the 30-day period may have been withdrawn, but again, we still post notices in preparation for the hearing, so there could be folks here this evening who live in the community and want to know more about it, or there could be folks who attend hearings who are interested in certainly all the trees that are being discussed each month at our tree hearings. But that summarizes our presentation, and again, it's removal for street light replacement, but we've learned as of this afternoon that it's related to wireless, and we really need to just start this process over.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So is the property owner or appellant here, or has the protest been withdrawn? All right. Is there anyone from the public that wishes to comment on this item? Please step to the mic and state your name for the record.
Josh Klipp, my understanding is that because of the SFMTA's Geary BRT, they're going to be removing every single tree in the median on Geary, essentially west of Stanion, over the next couple of years, including Mayor Lee's honorary tree and the tree that was planted in honor of Charlie Starbuck, who has planted more trees than anyone in this city. Anyway, kind of an aside, but my question really is, how is it that we're removing all of the street trees along the median but putting in a new wireless pole? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else from the public wish to comment?
For the record, my name is John Nolte. Several years back, I stopped the BRT coming in all the way down to Market Street and made it go back to the full board and put in back the bus stops. And also being a native and living in the Richmond district, the merchants opposed the BRT because of construction for a long period of time and hurting the small businesses along the Geary corridor. So to remove the multiple trees, as was stated before, because of the Geary Rapid Transit project, we are concerned. As a native, I'm concerned of removing all those trees just because of the project, and I didn't agree to that. And again, this is something that these departments force these things onto the community, and I know that the Geary Business Association was against the, and I know him personally, and also the editor and former editor. For the Richmond Review, they were both against the removal of the trees on in Richmond, and plus other people that I know growing up in Richmond who I still am in contact with. So since they're not here at the meeting, I am speaking on behalf of them and people that I do know that are property owners and business owners and so forth in that neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else from the public wish to speak regarding this item, 6100 Geary Boulevard median? Okay, seeing, okay.
Yeah, hi, I'm Sarah Coe. I was just wondering, why are there not going to be replacement trees? Is there any way we get an answer for that?
Does the department wish to give a rebuttal?
Good evening, Chris Buck with Public Works. My understanding is that, so these are, we're calling them trees because anything that's a plant that's woody is classified as a tree. Certainly giving them that due respect in this regard. Generally, our tree planting requirements for trees and streetlights is a minimum of 9, 15 to 21 feet away from streetlights. That said, these are really serving more like landscaping. And so we're going to double check the BRT plans. We'll check with our landscaping operations team that maintain general landscaping on the medians. If there's any room to plant replacement trees and or equivalent landscaping, we'll be looking into that, and that's something that the applicant, Modus, will be at, sort of forwarding that to them as well. Great question. Again, I think we're just having to reset this one, unfortunately. It's a wireless facility. There's BRT involved. We want to do more of our homework before we bring this one back up to the public and repost notices. I appreciate the feedback from the public.
Okay, thank you. Seeing no further public comment, this item is now closed. We now move on to item number 4 on the agenda, order number 201392, to consider the removal of one street tree with replacement adjacent to 3015 Van Ness Avenue.
Good evening, Chris Buck, urban forester with San Francisco Public Works Bureau of Urban Forestry. We initiated the removal of this tree last fall. The subject tree is Acacia melanoxylon, otherwise known as blackwood acacia. This is a tree that's very sensitive to root pruning or root disturbances. it was heavily planted. It was a really heavily planted street tree across the city. We had great numbers of them along Haight Street and Divisadero specifically. I would say, like the ficus, since the 1990s, it's essentially been removed from our planting list. The general challenges with this species is that it doesn't tolerate a lot of root disturbance and or root pruning. Unlike the ficus trees rarely experience a root failure where the entire tree falls over. Acacia melanoxylon is much different. They actually experience quite dramatic root failures where the entire trunk, base of the trunk and a root plate fails and separates from the root system below. And so what we do, does it mean that we have a death sentence on Acacia melanoxylon? No, far from it. We still have a lot of large ones, what remain, on Van Ness that are not impacted by the BRT, and along Haight and Divisadero and a number of other areas throughout the city. It's evergreen. Typically the foliage is lush and green year-round, and so we'll go through the conditions. But again, just if you were to Google, go on Hoodline. Hoodline is a really amazing resource for tree failures. They cover a lot of like new restaurants and restaurants that close, but they just they cover any tree failure that's dramatic enough to make people click. But what it's done is it's documented a lot of our large acacia tree failures. And I just wanted to show a few of those just so you can visualize. Now you can see recent sidewalk repair, that white sidewalk near the base of the trunk and the total failure. But also note the green lushness of the canopy. So a tree can be green and lush, but it doesn't mean that it has a sound root system. And generally, our inspector in preparing this presentation added that anecdotally, we have about 2 to 4 blackwood acacia failures of this nature per year, meaning, where this entire tree just falls down rather dramatically. There's a lot of significant amount of base and root rot, which is characteristic of mature blackwood acacia trees. Another example of what it looks like when a large acacia tree comes down. This is on Divisadero. So the subject tree is Acacia melanoxylon. We keep our eyes closely on them. We monitor them closely. So the subject tree was showing decline, and it's hard to see from this image, but you'll see in other images. But at the topmost left side of the canopy, there's starting to be decline within the canopy. There's also some general yellowing or chlorosis of the leaves, which just shows reduced vigor. This shows some of the reduced vigor throughout the canopy. We also had contractors out there doing work. Actually, coincidentally, 2 days after we posted the tree removal notice, there was a sewer line repair and there was trenching. There were some roots cut. They weren't very large roots, but certainly some roots were cut. And again, this is a species where we really prefer not to see any roots cut. The sidewalk around the tree shows generally a number of different repairs that have occurred over the years. This shows a section of the sidewalk that was repaired before and is being damaged again by the root system. Again, we're reluctant before to prune a lot of roots, and so we haven't got a lot of life out of those recent repairs. It's lifting the sidewalk up again. One of the things that our inspector, this item has been continued a number of times, and the most recent time when we posted the removal notices on the trees, our inspector noticed that there's starting to be a separation. So if you look at the base of this trunk or root crown, there's a separation there. This really caught his eye because you don't always get warnings before trees experience dramatic root failures, but sometimes you do, and this is really one of those cases. So wanting to understand what was going on, he excavated a little bit more, and what he found was that he was able to extend his tape measure 16 inches below the base of this root crown. And so there's decay and space there just below this root crown, and it is beginning to separate. The lean, unfortunately, is worsening, and at this point, with this new information about the tape measure going 16 inches below the base of this trunk, unfortunately, we've really held off on removing this tree. We had some miscommunication problems on our end with the primary person from the public who really didn't want to see this tree removed. I completely understand. We've had a lot the loss of a lot of big mature trees on Van Ness. But we really do feel adamant that this tree is becoming unsafe. The lean is worsening. And again, based on everything we've seen in our expertise with Blackwood acacia, this is a tree that really does need to be removed at this point. So unfortunately, we do advocate strongly that this tree be removed and replaced by Public Works. Thank you.
Thank you. Is the property owner here for this item? Appellant wish to speak? If not, anyone from the public wish to speak regarding this item?
Just lost my train of thought. Oh, yeah, I know what it was. The only thing I want to bring, I'm really glad actually that Chris had that picture of the trenching being done along the side of the tree. Anyone who lives in San Francisco and tries to navigate our streets right about now is having a hard time getting around a lot of the sewer work that's being done.
Yeah.
And I would say a good percentage of that time, that sewer work is being done without any regard to tree protection. Just take a look at the 311 logs, at least the ones that I'm submitting, showing tons and tons of construction work being done. And so I would just like to find out whether or not Urban Forestry has fined that construction company for performing that work without the required tree protection.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to comment regarding this item? Okay, seeing no further comment, well, Chris, do you have anything further you wish to add for the department?
Chris Buck with Public Works, Bureau of Urban Forestry. I'll double check. Sarah Stacy was the first inspector that evaluated the tree, and she went out to look at the site and didn't feel that there was any damage done to the tree when the excavation occurred. We were expecting there to be, but she was a little bit surprised that there wasn't. She was advocating that the tree remain. We do need to confirm who's performing that work. But again, I have conflicting information about damage or extended damage. The tree protection issue is a good one that Mr. Klipp brings up, and we'll look into that. If this is a residential repair, typically they just are out there repairing what they need to repair, and they're out there so briefly that I don't see a lot of tree protection, but that's a good point. If it's a residential repair, we do go out and make sure that roots are not cut, but we certainly aren't called out for every single case. But I will say that we were a little surprised that there weren't large roots that were cut. Mr. Keller, in reviewing the photos, he feels like there were some roots that were cut. But the point's taken. But we were already initiating removal of this tree weeks before the work occurred. So when we're out there posting notice on the tree, we actually came across the work ourselves. And we'll double check and make sure if there was an actual violation, we'll follow up on that.
Yeah, the photo did show, I mean, there were tiny roots, but it did appear to show like some roots might have been.
Absolutely. And our preference, anytime anyone is opening the earth up that much next to a large tree, absolutely, I'm not creating excuses for anyone. We should be called. At a minimum, we should know what's going on. Who are you? Why are you doing this?
Yeah.
Are you aware of what you're doing? And so I completely concur with
some
Mr.
protocol.
Klipp. Yeah.
Okay, all right, yeah, I think it's a good point. Thank you. Anyone else for this item? Seeing no one further, this item is now closed. We now move on to the final item on the agenda. Order number 201405 to consider the removal of 11 street trees, 10 ficus, and 1 Callery pear tree with replacement along 16th Street between Potrero and 7th Street, adjacent to the locations listed below. This is related to Phase 1 of the 16th Street Improvement Project from 7th Street to Potrero.
Good evening, Chris Buck again with San Francisco Public Works, Bureau of Urban Forestry. There's been a lot of community meetings, or at least feedback from the community about potential tree removal along 16th Street. We had a Board of Appeals case a couple of months ago. Also, the SFMTA held a community meeting in early May that they sponsored. Public Works was at that hearing also to present information and answer questions about proposed tree removal along 16th Street. As much as possible, my preference was to keep both Phase 1 and Phase 2 of this project as a single project and a single hearing. However, project managers with the SFMTA have a different contract schedule for Phase 1. Phase 1 is basically everything that's east of Potrero Avenue on 16th Street. I was not quite aware of their timeline for that, and so we are scheduling, that's why we're having a hearing this evening about the trees to the east of Potrero Avenue and not hearing the item with both east of Potrero Avenue and the section that's much more controversial, which is west of Potrero Avenue. So going through the trees, again, stepping back, when there are projects on a street, whether it's a utility that wants to replace a sewer line, a PUC that wants to replace a water line, or if the MTA is trying to make transit improvements along a corridor, Public Works will go out and evaluate the condition of our trees along that corridor. Even if the project itself says, hey, we're not impacting these trees, we have to go out because we don't want there to be X amount of time of disturbance to the community and then find out, lo and behold, a few years later that, hey, by the way, there's a bunch of trees out there that are in really poor condition. So there's been a discussion about these sites on 16th Street, more so in the heart of the Mission to the west of Potrero Avenue. San Francisco is also implementing Street Tree SF, where we have to inspect and evaluate trees on a systematic basis. So we have sort of two things going on. We have SFMTA with a project that is going to be making improvements to transit, various pedestrians, vehicle traffic. There's also other utility work that's taking place under the sidewalk. And then our part on this is, well, what are the trees doing out there? Let's go take a look. And so we went out and evaluated the trees along this stretch, and these are the trees that urban forestry would recommend removing. Phase 2, there'll be a lot more information about the project. Most of the trees in Phase 2 that we're recommending for removal are not impacted by the project. Some of the trees in Phase 1 that we're talking about this evening are potentially impacted by the project, but when we went through and evaluated the trees, we said, well, these are trees we'd prefer to see removed anyway. The SFMTA is bringing the money for the funding of the removal of these trees and also the replacement. So it's another reason why we want to do this coordination with city agencies, is that we want to use their funding to get replacement trees along 16th Street. They have a proposal to replant 3-to-1 replacement ratio for the number of trees removed versus the number of trees that get replaced versus what's removed. So there's that general background information as well. So the first tree that we're talking about this evening is 1150 16th Street. It's a very small Callery pear tree. We approved this tree for removal because the tree itself has very poor structure. A Callery pear tree, there's one that survived the 9/11 World Trade Center attack. Now, survive in quotes, it was pretty much decimated, but someone moved it and rehabbed it in New Jersey and then brought it back. But it's sort of like a ficus. They have codominant stems and they're constantly shedding branches. So it's a poor species even when you have good structure, and this one has very poor structure. It's essentially the original tree may have been vandalized, and what happened is that 3 trunks sprouted in the place of the original one. And so for us, this is a no-brainer. This is not a rehab project that we want to engage on. We want to remove this and replace it. The MTA will replace it with a minimum 36-inch box size replacement tree. So green leaves, yes. Structural condition, extremely poor, great candidate to remove and replace. The next site that we're covering is 1616 16th Street. There's 4 ficus trees on this block that Public Works recommends for removal. Some of these will be impacted by the SFMTA plans to install bulb outs, but our decision to approve these is really initiated by Public Works due to the poor condition of the tree. So we have 4 ficus trees proposed for removal on this block. This is tree 1 with a number of codominant stems, some with included bark, some with wider angles of attachment, but certainly a tree structure, even the upper left section there's 3 stems that originate from one. You pick your stem to fail. It's a very poor structure. This is the backside of the same tree. Very poor structure, prone to fail. It's almost like a balloon. I wish what I could do is take the big section on the right, press the other sections, and essentially reform this tree so that the central trunk has all that mass. Everything else that's grown on this tree is essentially on a stem that's prone to fail. So this would not be a reclamation project for pruning and restructuring. The next tree, tree 2 on the same block, is very poor structure. The trunk comes up and then divides into 4 competing stems. The stems are all roughly about the same size. This is structure that, is in Arboriculture 101, how to assess the structural integrity of the tree. And this would receive a failing grade in terms of tree structure. And what we know about ficus trees is that they are failing where they have weak angles of attachment, which means narrow angles of attachment, some with or without included bark, stems of the same size, and they're splitting apart on us citywide. The last 2 trees in this block is tree 3 and tree 4. Tree 3 is on the right. It's a smaller ficus, but it has structural problems. This is the main trunk. Again, all these side lateral branches have been allowed to grow and compete with the main central leader. This tree is young, presents fewer public safety concerns, but the structure is absolutely terrible. It would be a shame to leave this tree growing and not replant it now and take advantage of the SFMTA funding replacement. Likewise with tree number 4 on this block, very poor structure. One trunk divides into 5 or 6 stems that are competing, equal in size, and poor structure throughout. This would be a very difficult reclamation project. Very difficult to mitigate this poor structure. A lot of folks in this hearing have heard us say again and again, we know now the importance of early and maintained sustained structural pruning. That's something that occurs now. It's not something that occurred back when it really mattered. 2016th Street, this is just one ficus tree. As you get towards Potrero Avenue, it's planted in a row of 3 other different species. They're New Zealand Christmas trees. This ficus, it's a very young tree. If you can see in this photo, it's not that tall. It's probably 20, maybe 25 feet tall. Absolutely terrible structure. Yes, it's a young tree. Do you want to, spend more resources on rehabbing this tree, or is it best to just remove this tree and replace it? We believe it's time to replace this tree. Again, there's a single, very slender central trunk in the middle of this tree. It's not been pruned to maintain structure. These stems are prone to fail. There's been some other branch failures, but again, the tree structure is terrible. So the last item for this evening, and unfortunately it's not a happy story, but there are times when city agencies fail to do things the right way, and this is an example of that. I need to fall on our sword and take responsibility. But we wanted to remove these 5 trees. These are ficus trees in front of World Gym. This image was taken in 2011. We fined the property owner for excessively pruning the trees this manner many years ago. The ficus trees, as you can see, are planted underneath several sets of low voltage and high voltage lines. But the property owner's been essentially pruning these trees into boutique lollipops. It's not a practice that we approve of. So when we evaluated these 5 trees, we saw this as an opportunity to get these trees out that have been very poorly maintained and managed and replace them with 36-inch box size replacement trees. This particular site, the tree on the very corner on the far right would not be replantable due to utility and spacing concerns. Then there's a blue curb, which is a handicap access. Then after that, there's another tree to the right of the telephone pole. There's a few trees here that would not be replantable in their current locations. The trees to the left of the utility pole have reasonable spacing, and those could be replanted, although we'd want to increase the spacing between the trees. The unfortunate thing that happened is, unfortunately, we had, I was out of the office, someone else was out of the office, and the MTA was believing that these trees had not been protested. And we had an exchange back and forth. We thought they were protested. Someone on my team who is also parenthetically my supervisor did a search on the internet, was checking and looking for the addresses. The MTA was approaching us that they really had a contract with a critical path issue. And unfortunately, we didn't communicate very well, and trees 4 and 5 that are out of view in this image were removed without a permit. Tree 3 in the left of this image, half of this tree was removed before word got out that they had to stop. That's tree 1, that's tree 2, that's tree 3, or half of it. And tree 4 and 5, unfortunately, removed without a permit. I want to apologize to everyone who's attending this hearing, because a lot of folks here I respect greatly, and we don't have this happen a whole lot where Public Works or another agency is involved with miscommunication. We can certainly show the emails back and forth. There was real effort to verify if the trees were protested or not, but in the end, it came down to human error and a misunderstanding, and we do apologize for that. That's something we're actively discussing as an agency. We typically would issue a fine if a member of the public did this, so we want to be consistent. We're not at that point yet, but we certainly are looking at what happened and where was the breakdown in communication. So the other trees to me are relatively straightforward. This one was going to be a relatively straightforward, let's get the topiary ficus out of there and replace them with quote unquote trees that can grow larger. Unfortunately, at this site, we've made a mistake, and we need to own that. So I want to apologize to the public, and we certainly stand ready to answer to that and figure out what we can do to mitigate it, which we have not yet begun to discuss, but we will be discussing that very soon. And just to recap, again, Phase 2 is the phase of 22 Fillmore improvements from Potrero Ave to Dolores. I'm waiting word from MTA on when they feel that they've satisfied public outreach to move forward with posting those trees to a hearing. But in the meantime, they have, from contract perspective, 2 completely separate contracts to do this work. And we want to say one city, do it all at once, but unfortunately their timeline for Potrero out towards Mission Bay is not on the same timeline. So with that, I'm open to public comment and feedback.
Just a couple of questions. So the trees that were taken out earlier, they were slated for removal anyway, right?
Well, we had initiated their removal. So and here they are, I didn't show this image. So the trees are on the far left in this image, tree 4 and 5.
Yeah.
We had initiated them for removal, but I do want to be clear, and I'm sure everyone's listening very closely. It doesn't mean that a permit was granted or would have been granted, and we're fully aware of that. The only thing I can assure the public is that it wasn't World Gym or the yoga studio or Gracie Jiu-Jitsu or whatever it is out there that was trying to remove these. This is an unfortunate error.
Right, okay. And I'm not sure if I caught it, but what species were we gonna, if we remove them, what's the replacement species for these trees?
We're replacing ficus trees with magnolia trees. Magnolia they can be large stature at maturity. Where we have high voltage lines, we have to plant small to medium stature so that they're rounding out below the level of secondary and high voltage lines. But it's Magnolia grandiflora, most likely Sam Summer when there's no power lines present, and most likely Little Gem or similar where there are overhead power lines present.
Thank you.
And again, I just want to say to the public, in no way do I feel flippant about this one. Hopefully you hear that from me. We know there's a 3-to-1 ratio replacement, but in no way does that make this any easier. We're sticklers on process, and I've often told our team, I may personally feel upset when a large tree is removed, but the bottom line is as long as our process was intact and unassailable, you know, let's live to fight another day. It's embarrassing when this happens within our own team. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is the property owner here for this item? Don't think so. Okay, is there anyone from the public who would like to comment on this item? Thank you. Please state your name for the record.
Yeah, hi, my name's Sarah Coe, and I'm a member of World Gym. I've been a member for several years, and I've always appreciated the trees there. I know it sounds probably silly, but they do provide a lot of shade, and it's a pretty hot area, that area around in Potrero Hill there. It gets pretty warm, and I ride my bike there a lot. Those trees, you know, I've always noticed them being there, and I appreciate them. And I ride up 16th Street every day when I go to the gym, and I see several blocks where there are no trees at all. And the few trees that are on 16th Street are now slated for removal. So, or quite a few of them, on at least on that side of the street. So it seems like to me, why don't we plant more trees before we take trees out? It seems, I mean, there's a whole section, 2-block section, where there are no trees at all. And so, and there doesn't seem to be any issues with buildings or anything. They're just open areas that could easily use trees. So, you know, I know it sounds probably silly, but it just seems, I don't understand their process right now, what they're thinking. Why don't they work to get more trees in before you take trees out? These trees, you know, I know they're not structurally, they don't seem like they would work, but they are working right now. And so before you tear them out, put in new trees so that when you take these trees out, we don't miss them so much, you know? Yeah, and I would like to know the process, if the public has any input into, you know, what kind of trees are you going to put in there, or is the city just making all these decisions now that you've taken over the supposed care of our city trees? Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Hi, I'm Vi Huynh, and I'm here to protest case number 201405. I went and inspected the trees today with my friend Ramon, who works as a tree trimmer, and according to the notices, they said that all these trees are in poor condition, but my friend Ramon verified that they were in excellent condition, all of them, except, of course, the 2 ficus trees that were cut down in front of World's Gym at 1500 16th Street. I mean, the little calorie pear tree, it still had pears on it, and it's not even pear season yet. So I think it's wrong for them to take out the few trees we have, especially in that part of 16th Street, because I'll tell you what trees provide. They provide a flourishing green infrastructure system that can provide beauty, wildlife habitat. They can suck up the stormwater. They clean the air by taking the carbon dioxide out of our atmosphere and generating oxygen. They reduce stress, so they help us mentally and emotionally and psychologically. And of course, they provide shade. So please do not grant the permits. I don't want any of the trees removed. And I think we should be planting more trees, not cutting the few we have. San Francisco is not one of the greener cities. For a city this big, we need way more trees, not less trees. And also, my friend Ramon was injured from the year 2009, I think. Is that when you were injured? Oh, 2000. He hurt himself, ironically, trying to trim a tree. Was it trimming or cutting? Cutting a tree. So we have to also take into account, not only are you killing the tree, which is a life form, but you might be hurting and debilitating a human being, you know, who might be hurting their back, cutting down these trees. So please do not cut down our trees. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yeah.
Josh Klipp. So on the replacement proposal, I know SFMTA is proposing a 3-to-1 replacement, but I would also point out that they haven't done any study showing that that's actually feasible. And as we know, as we've heard plenty from Urban Forestry today, and we hear in these removal hearings often, is that there's a lot of competing infrastructure, which often prevents planting either replacements and or as many trees as we would like. So I would just respectfully request that SFMTA actually study that before they keep telling the public that's what they're going to do. I would also point out regarding removals, there was a major removal along Potrero Avenue, right along this corridor between 14th and 15th, I think, over 2 years ago. And even on one city block, there are still 9 empty basins from those ficus that were removed there. And so those have not been replaced. And even right around the corner from World's Gym over on 17th Street, there were 2 ficus that were taken down by a private developer. Their basins were paved over, and no matter how much I brought that up to Public Works, I was told nothing could be done. Speaking of the ficus, we know that the ficus are coming out by the hundreds right now. We've seen plenty of those hearings in here from the Mission, Hayes Valley, North Beach, Soma. There are literally hundreds of ficus coming out. And as a matter of fact, there are 7,000 ficus in the city altogether, which comprise 6% of our canopy. All of these are going to be coming out in the next few years. 6% of our canopy is a lot when you consider that we have already at 13.7%, the smallest urban canopy of any major city in the United States. Because of these mass removals, I have consistently submitted letters requesting a CEQA evaluation be done. Under California law, this scale of project triggers CEQA requirements, CEQA being the California Environmental Quality Act. And in a city that has just declared a climate emergency, we can't be bringing down trees without the legally required evaluation of the environmental impact. And so I make these requests in this administrative forum as step 1 in exhausting my administrative remedies. And if the city continues to fail to address the CEQA requirements, then I suppose the next step is to bring a writ of mandate to the Superior Court and ask a judge to order the city to follow CEQA, which I would rather the city just follow the law in the first instance. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is John Nolte. I need the overhead. I took this picture in May of 2019. As you can see, the trees were trimmed and there's room under the electrical wiring. Again, these are the trees in May 2019. And you see they're still there. Then here again, another picture I took in May 2019 of the trees. Then we get into June, this Saturday, chopped, half the tree right here. Then you see the 2 on the sidewalk chopped. Then also I have here the notes from the MTA meeting of May the 7th, talking about the trees and replacement and what MTA was at least the notes of that meeting of over 100 people that went to it. So this is for public record for you. Now, more information I want to give out. I'm more concerned about phase 1 because that's what we're talking about, phase 1 of the for 16th Street. There were more trees than those the 11 that are on the agenda. So I question now why only the 11, where are the rest? And also, I actually have pictures showing that those, when because I went down there and that was the only way I could protest them, was actually to go to each site. So they were posted. So for MTA, and you've seen the pictures in the May, because I have it on the back of the piece of paper, the date it was taken, that MTA is working across the street. So they're there. They're working on the project. So to tell me that they didn't know, because the postings, I believe, were a couple months before that, I walked down there, and that's how I found out about the addresses so I could protest. And that's the procedure. You had to have the exact address before you could protest. So it may be a miscommunication with the 2 departments, but if they're working the project and there's a project, what do you call it? Somebody from the MTA in charge of the whole project, and he didn't walk down the street and he doesn't see all these signs that the DPW put up on all the trees as required for their requirement, that I can't believe about emails going back and forth. That's irrelevant. You're supposed to walk your project, see what's going on. I mean, you're digging up the street. This is a $16 million project. To tell me that you can't see the signs that are put onto the project, I could walk down the street, I could see signs. So, you know, they can't see the signs because Bureau of Enforcement, when they post on the front side and the back side of the trees. So depending on when they do it. So to say that the signs weren't up is a leap of faith. And here we have, because I gave you the notes of the May, there's a date on the notes from the MTA when they had the hearing. Well, that's between the May and July. So we had a neighborhood meeting. The trees were still up. And so therefore, they were there. They were holding a meeting. They were aware of what trees were being, because he had a booth about trees. So it was discussed. To tell me that there was this communication about emails got nothing to do with it. They already knew. He had a list of all the trees that were being removed. And being protested. So
You have 1 minute.
okay, but I just wanted to explain that it was way before the MTA removed the trees. There was a meeting, and the list was provided by a DPW of the ones that were being protested and removed, and that list is bigger than being discussed in phase 1.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Does anyone have any further public comment for this item?
Good evening. My name is Lance Carnes. I'm guessing this clock doesn't work, right? So
No, but
You'll tell me? Okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah, my position is that the 11 trees, I'm not sure about the calorie pair, but I think the ficus trees should not be removed. I'm just going to show a couple slides here on the overhead, if I could get that set up. I don't know if you can read this from your seats, but I can read it to you. This is a set of data from a project called Every Tree SF. Let's see. This project was started probably 2016, it was finished in 2017, but the data is not currently publicly available. But if anybody wants to try this at home, you can actually go to Public Works site and do a FOIA request for something like all records for Arbitro tree census for tree addresses 1500 through 3299 16th Street, which is what I did. But if you have any other trees in your neighborhood you'd like to investigate, you can actually write and see what the Every Tree SF survey came up with. And these are all professional arborists. It's the purpose of the project was to survey all trees in San Francisco. And they recently announced that the total number of trees in San Francisco is 125,000, 40,000 spots for potential either empty basins or a place where you can plant new trees. So, and the data that they provide is actually quite useful. It's more than just the location of the tree and the species. And actually, there's something here called recommended maintenance. As you can see, all these trees that we're talking about today, the 10 ficus trees, all have the recommended maintenance of routine prune. None of them are marked removal. So a professional arborist went down the street, looked at all these trees, and this is the recommended maintenance for it. Here's another, take this data, you can pump it into Google Maps, and you get something like this, which is, I'm not sure I can show them all at once here, but here's Potrero Ave is over here.
Yeah,
and
1 minute left. Okay.
7th Street is down here. So you can see there's, they're rated small tree routine prune, so all of these are routine prune, and then the large trees are these 1, 2, 3 here. So these are done by a professional arborist, and they differ greatly from Bureau of Urban Forestry's assessment. I'm actually from a different neighborhood, and been tracking the progress of street tree maintenance around the city. Let's see where my next slide is here. That's on the back of this one. So here's, this sort of shows the overreach of Bureau of Urban Forestry around town. You may recall the main library set of trees was, remember, 19 trees, and Bureau of Urban Forestry said they should remove 19. The citywide survey said there are 19 trees and 0 should be removed. Same thing in North Beach, 7 should be removed, 7, 0. Hayes Valley, 39, 39. I only got 21 trees out of the Every Tree SF survey. But you can see it goes down. And then 16th Street, if you look at the extent of the 16th Street, there are 50 trees. Buff says take out 41. There are 50 trees in the citywide survey, and they say take out 15. So there's quite a difference in these two things. So I'd like to, request an explanation from BUF as to why their own survey, so the Every Tree SF was actually commissioned by Public Works, why their own survey differs so greatly with their internal arborist assessments.
All right, yeah, thank you, sir. Yeah,
Okay.
3 minutes is up, thank you. If you wish to submit the documents,
Yeah.
the clerk will
There you go.
take them from you.
There you go. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Public Works, do you have any rebuttal that you might wish to add?
Chris Buck, Bureau of Urban Forestry, San Francisco Public Works. Not rebuttal, just additional information. The survey that was done was very, very helpful. There's a lot of aspects to that survey that we absolutely cherish and hold up with great respect. We thought we had 105,000 street trees. We found out we had 125,000 street trees. So just a little difference of 20,000 more trees to maintain.
Missed 20,000.
So it was really great information to get. I was on the panel that selected the outside contractor. I've been working in the city for 20 years, so I do know that on a personal note, the public who's here today is dealing with a resident of San Francisco for a couple of decades, someone who probably knows the trees better than anyone. And what I can tell them is that their recommendations on what to remove, I've never looked at ArborPro's recommendation on what to remove, me personally, to make a decision about when a tree should be removed. Have I looked at how many trees we actually have, how many potential planting sites we have, what are the size of the trees that we have? Again, there's great information in the survey. They did a great job with species, more or less. And when we were selecting a contractor to have serve us and serve the public and serve the Urban Forest Council and Friends of the Urban Forest, absolutely there's a song and dance about how every contractor who's proposing to get this survey bid is somehow much closer to the trees here. Now, I think we ended up with a contractor largely based out of Southern California. We had some from Ohio or New Jersey. I forget where all the locations were. But for sure, a big pitch is like, hey, we'll know your species. I mean, one thing was just getting the species correct, right? What I will say, though, is I don't, there are times when they judged our trees too harshly. Like what we think is a good-looking tree because it's withstanding some fog and wind. To them, they thought, this thing looks ragged, ragged and haggard. This is in really poor condition. And to us, we're like, we're proud of that tree. But I think we're definitely, and it is explainable, we don't agree with recommendations on tree removal for ficus. Now, if you look at the recommendations for other species, I haven't done that. Again, I'm not using their data to tell me personally. Is it guiding it's guiding us. It's guiding us in a great way. It's telling us, where do we have the largest trees and the largest number of trees? Let's prune those grid by grid. Absolutely, we need to be systematic and strategic. But unfortunately, if you're looking for why is a third-party arborist who has an evaluation from a couple of years ago recommending keeping the trees, if the trees are small lollipops, is anyone going to initiate removal? Typically not. If the MTA is telling me they can replant with 36-inch box trees, well, now you've got my attention. So for sure, that information is out there. We can continue to talk about it at hearing after hearing, but that's just our initial, just some feedback about why the Arbor Pro census, their recommendations are different from what Public Works is doing sort of citywide. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, seeing no further comments from any of the items on the agenda, if there's anyone who has anything further to say, who came in late and did not have a chance to speak regarding any of the previous items, now is your chance to do so. If you already spoke, you may not speak again. All right, seeing no one further, this hearing is now closed, and determinations will be made, recommendations rather, will be made within 10 business working days. Thank you, everybody, and have a good night.